Hello, and welcome to another episode of Code and Pixels. My name is Kelly, and I'm once again joined by my amazing co host, Akunle. And today we'll be chatting with Donnie D'Amato about the definition of a component.
Cool. Thanks, Kelly. So background about Donnie. Donnie is the founder and chief architect at the Design System House. Hey, Donnie. Thanks for being on the show. How are things going?
Things are going. I've actually been a little under the weather. I did a lot of meetups last week, and actually one of those was when Atakudali and I finally met for the first time and like knowing each other for 5 years and being in the same city more or less. But yeah, I'm a little under the weather, but I'm sure I will work through it. I was able to get up and get dressed, so that's the beginning of greatness.
Cool, cool. So, Donnie, when I was looking at your background, I kind of saw that you have a master's degree in communication arts. Can you tell a bit about why did you get the degree, but also like what are some of the things you were doing?
Yeah, so the TLDR is I got the degree because I didn't have a degree. Back when I was in school, there was really no job for like what we do now. So the only way to get a job is to have a piece of paper for someone to just let you talk to them, right? That's kind of like how it was. Like you just had to have a piece of paper. Otherwise, if you didn't go to school, it's like, well, I have all these people who did go to school, so they're more viable as an employee than someone who didn't. So I ended up getting that master's degree, or actually, well, the BFA and then eventually the MA, just so that I would have a leg up in the, the cutthroat world of finding a job. And again, that cutthroat world was before trying to do what we do today. Ultimately, the jobs that I've had most recently in design systems and UX engineering had nothing really to do with that degree. Like no one's really paying attention, as far as I know, to that master's degree for what I do. They're really paying attention to all the projects and work that I do otherwise.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like the industry definitely has switched where some companies are not requiring any sort of degree. So it's kind of interesting, kind of see the transition of like how the industry has gone with like formal education. Um, Follow-up question is like, how has the master degree influenced your professional journey? More lines of like day to day, or kind of like how you work with people or build products.
So my master's degree in communication arts is attempting to, of course, communicate ideas to audiences, right? The reason why I went into the communication arts degree is because I was originally an AV nerd. So I'm all about, film, TV, radio, all that kind of stuff, which is probably why you see the golden microphone set up here. I just like that kind of equipment. And I've dabbled in attempting to do communicative uh, techniques and work with my current work in design and engineering. I am this close to having my own video podcast of sorts as well, but I just got to have it just right for myself to actually execute. So I commend you folks on actually just making it happen here. Um, so I think that's a lot of it. I also really enjoy writing. I do have the blog that's at blog.d'amato.design that have been pretty successful and have had a lot of folks reference it for their work as well. So all those little pieces, as long as I'm communicating those ideas, I think has been successful.
By the way, if you haven't checked out Donnie's blog, we'll link that in the show notes. But it's like the design of it is like I always want to like redo my website. I'm like, Donnie's site's so good.
Thank you.
But yeah, I love that you talked about like getting your foot in the door. Like a lot of places have that criteria, and as Adekunle mentioned, that shift of what people are looking at these days, I think has changed over the course of the last few years. So I wanted to talk about components. So how would you define a component within a design system?
Goodness gracious. So this is going to be a problem for me because, the setup for this is I'm doing a research study. And I mentioned it at Clarity this past November that I'm going to be starting this research study. And just this weekend, I really started diving into the hypothesis and you know, what the research is going to cover. And because unfortunately, the answer to that I have for you right now is I don't think I have one right now, or at least one that I want to share. And the reason I'm not really sharing it is because I kind of don't want to influence the direction of the research. So I have some ideas, and I don't have anything concrete when it comes to what a component is. But I think the thing that's probably in everyone's mind is that, wait a minute, I know what a component is. I can identify them right there, and there's a button there clearly, and that's a card. But if you just take it for a moment, thinking about how you might count components in your experiences, you come across problems like you have a button component, and potentially you might call that like atomic, like Brad Frost does. You can't break it down any further. But then you have a card component, and that card component is probably composed of several different atomic level components. So if you're going to start counting these things in your UI, are you counting all the pieces that make up the card, or are you counting the card itself? And that decision is going to influence across systems and identify, okay, how much of this experience is covered by the design system and its components, and how much isn't. And then on top of which, we haven't even spoken about are the styles that are applied to individual elements also components or not? Like, is that something that we need to measure as well? Like, we might not ship a link component, but we might ship the styles for links in the design system. So is that something that we're covering as a component or not? How does that fit in? So, like I said, there's a research study that's coming through. I hope to share that out in the next couple of months or so, to start getting some feedback on it. And, the whole purpose of this is to attempt to better define measurement of components. Measurement is a big thing that's been going on recently. Omelet.dev is a product from, I think it's Zeppelin, right? That is coming out to attempt to measure your component library in different ways. But I will pose the question back to you folks, and to your audience as well. And the way I'm going to frame it depends on what kind of person you think you are. Of course, from the UX engineering standpoint, you could be in one of two camps, or across both of them, and understand this. So here's the question. When we're counting components, from a design perspective in Figma, I'm going to ask, how many times are you going to pull in a component from your library into the artboard? Assuming that you can copy and paste, right? So when you actually pull in that button the first time, you should be able to copy and paste the button again on your artboards. How many times would you pull in a component from your from your library into your artboard? The number of times should possibly be the number of components, right? From the engineering side, it's really what your package JSON looks like, or your import statements look like, right? The number of import statements you have for those pieces inside of your file or your project overall, because of course you could use the button as many times as you want from the import statement. So that's the beginning of the framing that I'm going to be having. I'm not entirely confident that defines what a component is, because that depends on what's offered by the library. There could be things that aren't offered by the library that would be components, but aren't because of reasons that I've yet to uncover.
I love that you talk about measuring and metrics, and I love that you broke it down between how a designer could define a component versus an engineering. That's a really good point about how are you measuring these things. And when you talk about, a button versus a card versus styles, like I know I've been in the same boat of, does this need to be a component? Which I think is it's a rabbit hole, honestly, and trying to align both design and engineering so that there's a clean dialogue between when you're shipping products and making sure that things are smooth in terms of making sure we're shipping the right things and translating that. So, yeah, I think it's awesome that you're doing this research study. So, along the lines of what you mentioned before with, something as simple as like a button versus a card where the card could have a button and other components within it. How would you characterize the distinction between a component versus something like a pattern?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to describe that is really that what is being delivered, right? The pattern in my mind is a conversation about the thing that we want to do, right? The component is the actual packaged deliverable of that pattern, right? That usually ends up being the situation, I think. So for a more complex pattern, let's say, a carousel pattern, you really wouldn't want to have to rebuild the carousel constantly over and over again. It really makes more sense to create that as a packaged unit that could be delivered uh, as a singularity that can, otherwise be configured as, to the heart's content. So I think that's the real separation there is, again, that pattern that says, okay, there are pieces here. You put all the pieces together in your own way, following these steps, and you will suddenly get a carousel, or the carousel just comes right out the box, right? I guess maybe it's the difference between, the put it together yourself and it works right out of the box kind of thing, right? Because like the IKEA table is already made, or you have to make it yourself. So it's the pattern as the instruction book, while you could just buy the table outright to make it easy for yourself.
When you were talking about the carousel example, it made me think of how our team has kind of used hooks and defined patterns. I think that's a really interesting way of thinking through functionality and not necessarily building a whole separate component, but utilities for these types of experiences
Yeah,
could be
that
used.
that reminds me of the way that I, separate from the research study, one of the things that I'd like to explore is the possibility of separating basically the headless UI scenario. But it's basically taking the set of function and separating it from the form, and how we might distribute libraries in that way. Because very often we are shipping both things together, where there's some opinionated way that the library is composed, or be styles and functions together. So I'm in the middle. Well, I shouldn't say in the middle. I'm have it as a note to explore this once I'm done exploring all the other things that I'm exploring now, to see what that might look like. Because one of the things that made me interested in it is style components, or the CSS and JS kind of mentality. There's been obviously a lot of whole bunch of stuff about Tailwind and how much people may like it or not like it. But what was interesting that came out of it was my own introspection about why I don't like Tailwind. And the reason I don't like Tailwind is only because of the utility version of stuff. Where in reality, what I think we should be really considering is writing CSS as if it was the component, or I shouldn't say components, the elements themselves. I had a whole project that ended up building this, but that's what styled components ends up doing. You're writing CSS and you're generating components from that. If you think about it, it's weird a little bit that we write HTML and then we target that HTML that does nothing other than a structure with styles. Why not just write the structure as styles, as one kind of, unit of work? And that could separate, or the amount of work that we might be doing. And that's essentially what you're doing in stock components or any other, most other CSS and JS solutions. So sorry to tangent, but something I had to talk about because it's exciting stuff.
No, I love it. I feel like we could have a whole episode about Tailwind. And
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, y'all about to start a fight because some people are very passionate about Tailwind, which I get, but I don't get because it's like, it's good for people that don't like, CSS, and I understand the kind of the benefit around that. Um, but I think, you always get into trouble, especially where it's like they want to add all these like particular class names and like everything's like slightly different or off. And I'm like, is it really a system if it's like, if like one button is different from another button and whatnot? Um, but I like the idea of like your example of like the carousel, because I always kind of mention where it's like the component becomes a pattern where it's like has a particular use case and it has like all these combinations of like these like components and whatnot. And um I know it's hard because especially from engineering land, like a pattern could be a component. Mm, And I think it's always the case where it's like you have to figure out like how the language could like work between both design and engineering because like we all call the same thing differently depending on what we're using on. But um yeah, I do enjoy this conversation. So to kind of go back to kind of like design system house. I want to learn more about like why did you start it, and also like what are some things you like working on in the future?
Sure. So the reason that Design System House exists is because I was getting quite a few folks reaching out to me to do some design system consultancy. I want to help. I want to be able to provide some guidance when I can, and I made this business so that I could to as a platform to provide that service. Now, when I ended up making that service, I ended up like kind of thinking, hold on a second. There are other design system consultancies out there already, right? There's 8Shapes and Big Medium and Sparkbox. All those folks have consultancies out there already. So what am I bringing to the table that's different, right? Why would a person reach out to me as opposed to any of these other folks? And my hook is that I'm dedicated to the future of design systems. I'm over making buttons and figuring out the naming convention of tokens. I'm done. I figured it out already. It's over, right? I'm much more interested in what we could be doing in design systems past what we're doing today, which is the regular maintenance stuff that we're, all attributed to. So I realized that what would be more beneficial to me is to focus on companies that are trying to level up design systems. So we're talking of folks like Knapsack, for example, or Zero Height, or even Figma. Those folks that are trying to provide new tools to support our systems thinking. Because I have ideas. I have some things that I'd like to see out there that I think could really be helpful, but I don't necessarily have the resources to go ahead and make all of these ideas. Um, So one of those ideas, which has already been made as far as I could tell, but I've had for a long time, was accessibility uh, announcement testing. So basically, if you have some sort of test suite and you want to assert that a particular announcement is made while going through that flow, there was nothing out there that I knew of that could do that. So I was like, this would be really great for as a product or a feature somewhere, maybe in a Cypress or whatever, that you can create a flow, determine what the announcements are supposed to be made when going through that flow, and verify that those are the correct announcements and nothing's being duplicated or missed and all that stuff. There's a product, I guess, that would be called GuidePup that does this, apparently. So GuidePup, I think, .dev is the project that does it, and I think it was first shown to me in a tweet by Diego Haz, I think, who's making AryaKit. And when I saw it, I was like, I've been thinking about this for years. I was like, yes, this is exactly what we need in the industry. So there's things like that that I've thought of that I'm like, well, if some other team would have made this, this would have been great, and I think it would really level people up. I'm glad that it was already made. So on to the next thing that we could be making. And I have a list of stuff. And if there's anything that's, interesting to, folks that I'd be working with, absolutely. And quite frankly, I like to think that I'm selfless in all of this because I'm not really looking for like money necessarily for this. Granted, yes. Would I like to have money to, it's a business and all? Yes. But at the end of the day, I'm not looking to like get over on anyone. Like I'm not going to, I don't expect to be like, no, this is my idea and I 100% rights and blah, blah, blah. I'd much rather be contributing to the community and leveling us all up in some way with these ideas and getting it out to folks that can, really execute on it. So, but yeah, that's behind the Design Systems House, is that there is, of course, research involved with it. For instance, the component research that I'm going to be doing recently, but also additional research that will also be involved over the years, hopefully. And potentially, this stuff would be funded by, folks that are interested in the research and and finding out what directions to take.
Um, yeah, I love that. I love the idea that you're kind of thinking about uh, community first. I'm a big believer that like you take care of the community will take care of you, and I think the design system community is like probably one of the better tech communities out there, and mm, definitely happy that you're doing it and looking forward to it. I'm wondering, like, let's say things kick off for Design System House. Like, where do you see it in like 5 years?
Where do I see it in 5 years? Um, I think it's really just to continue doing what I'm doing. Um, it's supporting the community. It's doing the research where folks don't have the opportunity to do that research, and finding the right direction to take in our practice. Because I think, as many of us already know, we wear many hats and therefore don't have a lot of time often to do the stuff that we think really would matter. And especially when it comes to research, right? That research field usually gets the short end of the stick all the time. And I teach user research at Parsons School of Design. I've been doing that for about 4.5 years now. And, there's a big importance behind doing research to identify the proper direction to go. Granted, yes, will the business have the final say most often? Of course, but to have the research, especially third-party research that has no influence on your business, uh, I think is going to be really beneficial to folks and help out people overall. So I could see it happening for the next 5 years, the same kind of thing. Um, I don't know what growth really looks like. Again, this is very new to me. I'm really good as a business owner, I'll have to say. I'm much more of a person who would work in the warehouse and get their hands dirty and get it done, and that's really what I'm about. But the business is really there as a safety net for, making sure that it's legitimate. That what I'm doing is not a scam, which I want to say is not.
Yeah, I wanna go back to your research study. A lot of what you're doing with that study is measuring and understanding usage. Is that the main goal, or do you have other goals for the study?
The main goal is to try and have a clear definition of what a component is. We all think we know what a component is, but I like to have it uh, an ability to say there is a standard in which we define what a component is, and it is shared across tooling, it is shared across platforms, or shared across organizations, so we're all speaking the same language. I've spoken to many folks over the past just month on ADP List that wants to have metrics about the design system that say something meaningful, but I fear that some of the tooling that's out there that's trying to measure this stuff is measuring it all in their own ways. Or if they give the option to those folks to measure it in their own way, they're of course going to measure it in their own way. And really, I like to see that's a standardization that we're all kind of can agree with, that says when we're measuring a component, we are either counting the card as a single component, or we're counting the pieces of the card, or something different from all of that, that really identifies, what measurement really means when we're talking about components. And hopefully even take that further into, okay, if we're, talking about styles or tokens, what does that mean?
Yeah, I could probably go down a deep dive on tokens and styles and styled components. And speaking of styled components, Tailwind. I know you laid down a spicy take there, but do you have any other hot take about design systems, or anything that maybe not be the convention, or something a hot take on design systems?
Sure. So yeah, I do. I have everything on the blog that is really the hot takes place. I have other blogs that are flying around the internet that are more personal or otherwise, but I've dedicated that one specifically to the design systems hot takes. And I want to talk, I guess, about my most recent one, which I don't think was necessarily the hottest of these takes, but it's just the most recent one. And I had a conversation with someone else about it that really solidified it for me. And the hot take is that um, the blog post is called "The End," and the end is meant to signify the end of what we do. And it's kind of interesting and potentially scary. But the reason why it was interesting to me is twofold. First off, Brad Frost reintroduced atomic design at a talk, I think in August or September this year again. And he also reintroduced the idea of this global design system, having a date picker that really does work and is more or less the same across all platforms and can be styled appropriately based on brand and other factors. And it's kind of like, why don't we have that, right? And clearly there'll be complications to that, and there are teams that are trying to make like open UI, trying to do that work. So that's something that's on the table that I was like, yeah, of course, that makes sense initially, that we keep reinventing the world. I've made 6 different date pickers in, the 10 years that I've been doing this stuff professionally. So, I'm done making date pickers. We should just have the one and call it a day. But here's the second piece. The second piece is during CES this year, Rabbit 1 or the R1 was introduced. And if you folks have seen that keynote, and if you haven't, please take a look at it, especially from folks in our industry. If you take a look at the keynote, what they are suggesting is that there is a device that basically allows you to tell it to do something that would potentially go across interfaces or even, across experiences. And that's very interesting because in that world, that person speaking to that device has no UI or really no graphical UI, right? It's the things that we keep building, right? The buttons that we keep making, the drop downs we keep making. The user never sees it, right? The only thing they really see is in the example that they give there about calling an Uber. All it says to the Rabbit is, hey, get me an Uber that goes over here. And the Rabbit system will go ahead and go through the flow of Uber to finally get you some options for you to go ahead and do the work. And I thought that was really interesting because, we're making all these UIs. We're spending so much time on these UIs and these systems to make sure the UIs are consistent. And then this technology comes along and you go, hold on a second. Are UIs gone? Are we done with UIs? Is it just computers talking to each other? And technically it is. We're just trying to figure out how to do that. And in the conversation that I had with this person last month, he was like skeptical. He's like, I don't know if it's really going to work out. I said, well, hold on a second. We did all of this before UIs. I used to call for a taxi on the phone with a person to get the taxi to my house. There was no UI. Didn't happen. So maybe this is a reimagining of what we used to do, just with all the new technology that we have, that now we're just going to go ahead and again speak to someone, even though it's not a person as much as it's really just a computer, cutting out the middleman of calling. And then we just get that option returned saying, okay, we got, here are the options of people, cars that are coming to the house. And you get, your Uber. And that kind of nullifies everything we do in design systems as it is today. And that's another important note in all of my work that I do in design systems house is, what does the world look like for the stuff that we do where there is no graphical user interface? Is there a design system for voice UI? Is there a system that's past that in design? I don't know. And that's something that I really like to explore, and I think we should be exploring overall very deeply, because I think there's things coming. There are changes coming, and we need to be prepared.
Donnie, I love that hot take. I'm also a big believer that after the last button I designed, I was like, there has to be other stuff to work on. And when I was doing a reflection about how I got into design systems, it was mostly kind of the case where I was like, I want to just build stuff very quickly that it's accessible, scalable, and performant. And I'm kind of thinking with any other industry, there's always a case where it has to evolve. So again, we have all these libraries. The web is getting better, with adding your own custom styles. And I think, there has to be another level to this or another way we can thinking about it. And someone that, like I was talking to about it mentioned like service design, where it's like we're thinking outside of the, GUI. We're thinking about like, spaces like setup and all that stuff. And I think that's something exciting. I know for some people it's terrifying, but I think, with anything there's going to be some sort of evolution of like how we do things overall. So, I definitely love that hot take, but and hopefully in the future I'll never have to design another button again. Um, because I hate
Oh
buttons.
man, all we can do is hope. I don't, I don't think it looks good for us, but we're gonna try.
um, cool. So, to kind of close out this episode, I'm wondering like, all right, someone new that's getting into the industry and I want to be a UX engineer. What is one piece of advice you would give them?
The one piece that advice that I would give them, I think the only thing that I could say is that to explain how I got into this, because the way that I got into this was because I was an artist that needed my art to be interactive. This is before the web and all that other stuff. I was a sculptor. And even before that, I'd play Legos, right? It's basically sculpture. What was really cool with that is that, when you would make that 3D, three-dimensional thing, people could walk around it, they could touch it, they can give feedback to it, as opposed to just looking at a painting, like, ooh, good painting. Yeah, okay, that's cool. But imagine being able to touch that painting and it reacts to that touch and something like that. So I was exploring a lot of that. And clearly, that's something that translates very well to the stuff that we do today. So I think if you are interested in UX engineering in that way, it's really just about a passion for taking your creativity and moving it to the next level.
I love that. I always say that like it's a gift and a curse to be able to kind of work from end to end because you're like, why are they doing it? Like, why is the button looking like that? And it just kind of the case where it's like the main role of like UX engineers is always like get the job done. Next question is like, if I want to support Donnie, like, how can I find you?
I'm very easy to find. It's Donnie D'Amato. I'm pretty confident I'm the first result. I'm probably the first page on Google with all my stuff that's there. So I actually just redesigned my website last week again for the 30th freaking time in 5 years, probably. So my stuff is there. The blog is linked there. I actually have a YouTube playlist of all the podcasts, which this will be on shortly. And then what else is on there? The bento.me/Donnie. I'm so happy I got the Donnie one on that one. So all that stuff is there. And then what else is that? I think I'm missing one more. Oh, you can schedule time with me to talk about design systems, UX engineering, basically whatever. Also talk about Overcooked 2 or how I used to love to play DDR. Kelly and I have to talk about that, of course, because we're rhythm game nerds. But you can schedule some time with me at cal.com, or you could try ADP List. ADP List doesn't really respect my calendar, so there's lots of ways of getting conflicts, unfortunately, there, and I hope they fix it sometime. But cal.com on my website is more accurate. So all those places, and definitely reach out.
Cool. Well, Donnie, thanks again for joining us for today's conversation. We want to thank our listeners for tuning in to this first episode of 2024. Super excited. For more content, feel free to kind of go to codeandpixels.fm for our previous episodes. Feel free to subscribe to our newsletter and whatnot. And yeah, connect us on any social media. We got TikTok, we got Instagram, we got Twitter, we got Code and Pixels FM. And yeah, thanks again and wish everyone a good day.
Thanks.